Thanks for downloading this episode of On the Record Online with Eric Schwartzman, the podcast about how technology is changing the world of communications. To subscribe to the podcast or share feedback, visit us online at ontherecordpodcast.com, on Twitter at OnTheRecord, or send email to ontherecordpodcast@gmail.com.
My guest today is the Pharma guy, John Mack. He's editor and publisher of Pharma Marketing News. That's a monthly e-newsletter of the Pharma Marketing Network. It's an exclusive marketing information resource and communications network for pharmaceutical marketing professionals. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me.
So start by telling us, what steps has the FDA taken to provide the pharma industry with guidance and regulations around how companies can effectively and responsibly use social media for marketing, customer engagement, and scientific research?
Well, there's a long history there, going back at least to 2009 when the FDA held, I think it was 2 days of public hearings on the subject. And basically they used that to get information from the industry about their viewpoints on how it should be regulated. They had a series of about 19 questions regarding social media and the internet and how the FDA might regulate the industry's promotion via those channels. And they collected a lot of comments in the online form that they had afterwards. And they promised to come up with some what they call guidance or guidelines. And I don't know if you're familiar with how the FDA works, but there are laws that are called regulations, which are passed by Congress, and then there are guidelines which are not legally binding, which is the way the FDA interprets how they will apply the law. And they can change their mind at any time when they create these guidelines, but still the guidelines are helpful to the industry. And the FDA promised to have guidelines on social media answering all these questions within a couple of years. Now, that was in 2009, and it's already 2014, and they've come out with only a little bit of guidelines that address one or two of the issues that they talked about at the time.
Talk to us a little bit about the guidelines. I know you reviewed them. I know you wrote about them on your website, your newsletter. So give us sort of an overview in a nutshell. Were they any good?
Well, it seemed that the latest issue of guidance or guidelines were hastily drawn up because Congress required them to come up with some kind of guidance for the industry by July 2014. So it seems like the recent guidance that they've sent out had to do with, things like when is the pharmaceutical company responsible for content that's created on social networks that they may own, for example. They may have a Facebook page, let's say, and the industry has typically not opened up those pages to discussion because they're afraid of two things. Number one, that people who make comments may start talking about their product or other products and might start talking about unapproved uses of these products, which in the industry is called off-label marketing or off-label uses. And if somebody on the Facebook page were to mention this, well, how's the FDA going to interpret that? So the guidance that recently came out dealt with some of those issues and essentially was saying that if this is owned by the company, they don't have responsibility for what's posted there, but they have to be very careful about it. And they still haven't definitely said how pharma companies should handle those kinds of situations. So the guidance was a little helpful, but not all that helpful with regard to that. I think the industry still needs, more feedback from the FDA on that.
Have you taken a look at companies that have closed Facebook pages versus companies that have opened Facebook pages? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, Facebook changed its policy, but before that, even a few years ago, there were a couple of companies that had open discussions on their Facebook pages, and they were what's called moderated discussions. So basically, one company, Janssen Pharmaceutical, had a Facebook page devoted, I think, to psoriasis, but it allowed comments, and it only would delete comments that violated its terms and conditions, and obviously one of the conditions was you don't talk about products positively, negatively, or any way whatsoever. So their experience, it seemed, was that it wasn't too much to handle, yet somebody had to monitor those conversations and keep track of them. And so it could work, but it requires, somebody to be monitoring that, and this costs money. So it's not just the issue of FDA regulations, it's the commitment of the pharmaceutical companies to, have full-time equivalents that handle those kinds of things.
Obviously, information posted to a page could also be distributed to one's followers off page. So, but the industry and the FDA is kind of looking at the page as something that should be policed by the brand, because clearly, if you follow a brand, you may get discussions on that page, whether you're on that page or not.
Well, technically, I may not understand all the features of Facebook, and I think that's part of the problem with FDA as well. But they're pretty technically savvy. They've caught pharma companies doing things like, in messaging to other followers. When you like somebody on Facebook, you can get a message from them, and the FDA was looking at those messages. So, yeah, they're responsible for what's on the page. They're not. It seems like the FDA is not going to hold them responsible for, somebody reposting things or sharing information from on the page with somebody else. I mean, once it's on the page, which presumes that the company who owns the page has approved it, then they, basically were responsible for the first instance of that comment. And, if it's on the page, that's what they're responsible for. But off the page, they can't be responsible if somebody modifies the content and so on. And the industry has always been afraid of that, even before social media came along, when you can just copy and paste things from websites. But they seem to have gotten over that fear on ordinary websites, so there's no reason why they shouldn't get over that with social media as well.
Let's get back to this FDA guidance. So where are we in the process now?
Well, it's called draft guidance, and basically that means that the industry can make comments and criticisms of it, and they really did criticize it a lot. They thought it didn't go far enough, or they thought the FDA was trying to hold the industry to be responsible for too much, and the comments are mostly negative. So now the FDA will have to consider those comments, and the usual procedure is that they need to answer every comment in another post, and that may be the final guidance. And still, that's not legally binding, but, it's something that they can, that the industry can use to feel assured that they can do things as long as they follow the guidance. So we're waiting for final guidance still, basically.
So based on the fact that there is no final guidance available, how are most pharmaceutical marketers hedging their bets? What are some of the basic steps they're taking to protect themselves in lieu of any formal guidance?
Well, I think for the most part, they're avoiding any branded type of social media. So you might not see too many branded Facebook pages, Twitter accounts. There are a few, I think. So they're trying to focus as if they were, advertising in Europe, basically, working with patients through just the disease awareness or on a therapeutic basis. So they might have, like I said, a page on psoriasis or on, the area where their products are used to treat medical conditions. So those are what are called unbranded types of communications. And so far they've been focusing a lot on that. You'll see somebody like Boehringer Ingelheim, that's a German pharmaceutical company that's privately owned. They've been running tweet chats, which are focused on topics like atrial fibrillation and COPD, where they would bring in physicians and have discussions mainly for physicians. Now, even those kinds of discussions are forbidden in the UK, for example. So they try to say, well, this tweet chat is not for UK physicians, but obviously anybody in the world can participate and listen in. So it's a little dicey in terms of, getting around the law, but, that's the way it is.
We're talking to the pharma guy, John Mack. He's the editor and publisher of Pharma Marketing News. And when we return, we're going to talk about mobile medical apps. Stay with us.
Let me ask you a question. How are you managing social media risk? Because your social media policy isn't going to help you manage social media risk. In fact, only 2 out of every 1,000 people even open the terms of service before signing up for an online service. So the truth is, no one reads your social media policy. They sign for it and stick it in the bottom drawer. I'm not knocking social media policies. They're what justify disciplinary action. But they don't get people to comply, and they don't teach people how to use social media effectively for business. In fact, after your legal team gets through with it, your social media policy probably discourages your employees to share your messages with their personal social networks. So what are you supposed to do? How do you manage the risks and capitalize on the opportunity? How do you scale social media engagement in the workplace effectively and responsibly? The answer is social media training, assessment, and certification. But not live training. It's too expensive and impractical. Cloud-based, on-demand social media literacy and compliance training is the answer. Training you can give everyone in your company. Training they can take anytime, anywhere, on any device. Training that's so useful, so entertaining, and so current, it's an employee benefit. We've introduced the world's broadest, deepest catalog of social media literacy and compliance training courseware. It's auditable, so you get a record of who knows what, and it's accessible via desktop or mobile, so employees can access it on their own terms. For a free trial, go to ontherecordpodcast.com/comply socially. See for yourself how you can use our system to manage the risks associated with social media in the workplace. You can even earn a social media compliance certificate. Go to ontherecord.com/comply socially and access your free trial. If you're spending all your time worrying about crisis preparedness, take half of that effort and put it into crisis prevention. Before someone says something that damages your reputation, before you leak customer data, before you get fined by the Federal Trade Commission. Certify your people. Certify yourself.
So, John, I noticed on the Dose of Digital social media wiki that you provide a link to from your e-newsletter, there is a collection of medical brands, pharmaceutical brands that have either Facebook pages or Twitter accounts, and I noticed that some of them are attributed to different countries. For example, Pfizer has Pfizer Mexico, Pfizer Turkey, and Pfizer News, Pfizer Australia. So, but then there are others like Roche Corporate that actually have branded Twitter accounts. Talk to us a little bit about, I guess, is that a reflection of the risk tolerance of the individual brands? Why is it some are comfortable with a corporate Twitter account and others aren't?
Well, now you're talking about a corporate account or a brand account? Like I know one branded Twitter account that Novo Nordisk does with Levemir, which is a treatment for type 1 diabetes. They have a race car driver who's a celebrity spokesperson. He's a fully branded person, by the way. When he's wearing his suit, he has the brand name on the front and what's called the fair balance information, side effects, and so on the back of his suit. This is really funny. But they have a branded Twitter account. It's called Race with Insulin. The name of the account does not reflect the brand, but he made at least one reference to the brand name, where he uses the Levemir injection pen during a race. He might tweet about that, but he can't say very much in the tweet about the brand, because if you start talking about, well, it helped control my insulin right away, okay, now you're making a statement about its use, and the FDA then would require you in the same statement to talk about the major side effects, which is called fair balance. And since there's only 140 characters in a tweet, it's virtually impossible to do that. So one of the things that the FDA has not addressed is how will it regulate, branded tweets that can't get into all that fair balance information. So instead of, giving any useful information about the product, all he can say is, I used my Levemir pen today, and, here's the scientific name, and that's it. So that's called like a reminder ad. You can mention the name of the product. As long as you don't mention what it's for, then you don't have to get into all these other FDA-required types of information, which makes the tweet really a bit useless, in my opinion. It doesn't really convey useful information. So it's kind of difficult to have a branded Twitter account. But corporate accounts, a lot of companies are doing that. They're using it for, corporate communications. As I mentioned, Boehringer has sponsored tweet chats, and most of these are run by the corporate communications people. And what's happening with social media is corporate communications and marketing activities are beginning to merge within pharmaceutical companies. So it's not just the brand people who are talking about around their brand, if not mentioning their brand, the disease that it's treated for, it's recommended for. You have corporate communications people who are working with the brand to develop these other kinds of social media activities like tweet chats.
So given that social media moves at the speed of a conversation, and I guess, the FDA moves at a much slower pace, what sort of predictions do you have for this regulatory agency's ability to really get its arms around pharmaceutical marketing on social media and provide useful guidance?
Well, it's hard to say because they've certainly got a lot of input. They got a lot of input from, people like Google, who, technically has lost a lot of money because one of the things FDA did was put a slammer on some of these search ads, branded search ads that pharmaceutical companies have been doing, where they mention the name of the product and what the product is used for, but then did not mention the side effects, and the FDA put a stop to that. And that was the major source of advertising for Google, from the pharma industry at least. And Google came up with several solutions to that, changing the way its search function could work for pharmaceutical companies, and presented that to the FDA, and it was actually used by Bayer Health in at least one instance I recall a couple of years ago, this beta version of the search ad. But the FDA has not come out and said, yes, we endorse that. So, on the one hand, they're getting a lot of help from the technology people involved, from the pharma industry itself, and from consultants and agencies that work with the pharmaceutical industry. They've received numerous comments and ideas. They had workshops, and it seems to me, well, what's holding them up? Obviously, the FDA has a lot of things on its plate, and maybe this is not as important as a lot of other things that they had going on, but still it makes them look bad, and I've lost a lot of confidence in their ability to answer those 19 questions that had to come out with guidelines that answer the 19 questions that they themselves pose. So right now, maybe they answered one half of the question, so they have a long way to go.
Meanwhile, the British Prescription Medicines Code of Practice Authority, which oversees the self-regulatory code of the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry, published informal guidance to provide the drug industry with advice on how to use online communications. Talk to us about that. How good a job did they do?
Well, they've addressed some of the issues. Tweets and they gave them guidelines for using Twitter, but basically they haven't come up with too much more than what is available from the FDA. So I can't recall exactly which guidance, which areas that they were more strong in, but it is self-regulatory, number one, and it's very interesting that in Britain, if you violate the code, they have the jury and everything there, they will publicly denounce you, basically. And I don't know if you have to pay a fine also, but the thing, it's made public. In the U.S., the agency that the pharma agency, the trade association, also has some guidelines, but they've never addressed the internet at all. All they've addressed are print and broadcast advertising. And even if you violate those self-regulatory guidelines, they don't say anything publicly. So it's a different system in Europe.
Now, let's close this up with a discussion about mobile marketing apps, because that's a pretty robust area, right? There's a number of organizations that are providing those types of applications, yes?
Oh, sure, yeah. Every developer in his garage is developing a mobile app.
And so how is the FDA grappling with those?
Okay, well, that's another whole ball of wax there, that they've also come out with some guidelines about, well, what are they going to consider apps that are more or less like medical devices, basically that's the concern. If these apps are meant to be used, for example, by physicians to help in the diagnosis of a patient, for example, that app could be considered a medical device and it would have to go through the medical device approval process. Now, there are other apps that for consumers that are more like, record your blood pressure or, remind you to take your medication, things like that. Those are apps that the FDA said they're not going to have anything to do with because it's personal medical apps or healthcare apps that are outside their purview because they want to look at apps that are, could be considered medical devices, and those don't qualify for that category.
And what are some of the developments with pharmaceutical marketers with respect to apps that they're manufacturing? I mean, are you seeing anything interesting there? What are some of the, most daring apps you've seen that would potentially require regulation?
Okay, yeah, I've seen a couple of them. For example, Janssen again had an app for psoriasis, and this is meant for physicians. And the first iteration of that app actually said in the app that it's intended to be used by a physician while diagnosing a patient. And what it had was, you enter in some data about the lesions on the skin, different areas of the body, and once you did all that, it would use some kind of calculation to calculate a psoriasis, probability number. I forget exactly what the term for it was, but this is something that was documented in the literature. This is how physicians have diagnosed this form of psoriasis, and it's been published. The only problem was, number one, it actually said it was meant to be used by physicians during diagnosis. So is this a medical device? It sounds like it. So that's number one. Number two, never mentioned any sources from whence it derived the formula for the calculation. Okay, and when you look up in the literature, there's some controversy about which is the right formula to use, okay? And so it never even documented which formula it was using. Now, the third problem is, and this is where the FDA is really concerned if it's used in diagnosis, is the calculation that the app is doing, is it correct? Has it been tested? Has it been verified? I mean, you don't want an app doing something like, for example, measuring your blood pressure and giving you false results. In fact, there has been an app that's done that, and it doesn't give you correct results. That could lead to problems where you are getting unrequired medical care because an app made a mistake. It wasn't properly calculating things. In fact, Pfizer had an app that they had to recall with a Dear Doctor letter because its calculations were incorrect. And so they sent out this letter. The problem is the app that they created was a downloadable app. So it exists on physicians' phones, and it doesn't go away. Even, assuming that the physician reads the letter, gets the letter, does he decide to delete the app? It's now out there, and it still may be used, and nobody has any idea of some physicians may be using it without realizing that they're getting incorrect results.
We've been talking to the pharma guy, John Mack. He's editor and publisher of Pharma Marketing News. You can find a link to his website on the show notes for this podcast at ontherecordpodcast.com. Join us next week where we are going to talk to Ike Pickett of Alabama Power about how to document social media policy violations. John Mack, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks very much for having me.
You've been listening to On the Record Online with Eric Schwartzman, the podcast about how technology is changing the world of communications. To subscribe to the podcast or share feedback, visit us online at ontherecordpodcast.com, on Twitter at ontherecord, or send email to ontherecordpodcast@gmail.com.